Hello, how are you, my dear students? Good afternoon, and welcome back to our creative writing class with me. Um, Last week we discussed about writing children writing or children literature. Today we are going to talk about poem or poetry. So it's going to be very interesting actually. But before that, I want to tell you the differences between poetry and poem. So many of you, some of you, you don't know how to differentiate poetry and poem. So basically, poetry is a process of writing a poem. So a poem is the product of a poetry. So when we talk about poetry, poetry itself has been existed for quite some time, for a long time ago, and it has been written by many writers, many authors, in many countries, in many nations, and there are so many poetries that have been very legendary or epic, such as Odysseus, if you heard about Odysseus before, and then in India we have what we call as Veda, and in Iran it used to be Babylonia, it used to be it used to be Persian. There is one famous product of Zoroastrian called Gathas. So poetry itself is defined as a literary form of art, uh, which is an evoke language, and it can be written on its own or in combination with other uh, arts in poetic form, such as in drama. And poetic itself has poetic drama, uh, poetic hymns, lyrical poetry, and prose poetry. So, poetry is distinguished from other forms of writing by its use of repetition, such as verse, rhyme, and the language is very aesthetic. So, the language is very beautiful, we can say. Poetry uses words and speech in rhetoric. Um, it also being used in drama, in song, and also in the comedy. Um, when we talk about poetry, poetry also suggests alternative meanings in its words to bring about an emotional and sensual response. We can say that poetry uses rhythm. So, if you ever heard about rhythm before, so rhythm is actually if words can be heard, so we call it as rhythm. And it also uses alliteration, onomatopoeia. If you heard about onomatopoeia, the sounds of uh, animals or things, which gives a musical effect to the poetry, right? And also poetry uses many symbols such as metaphors, symbolism, smile, metonymy, irony, ambiguity, to give us reflection, to give us an explanation that it has different meaning or interpretations. Okay, I've told you earlier that poetry itself has many elements. Some of them are prosody. Uh, Prosody is something like a rhythm that consists of musical elements of words. Meanwhile, poetry also has the element of matter, yeah, the study of matter, rhythm, and intonations. So, rhythm is actually the timing set by accents such as syllables, moras, meter, and a meter system uses a system used by poets like rhyme, alliteration, resonance, which are ways to create a repetitive pattern. Yeah, you have to underline this. These are used to create repetitive patterns of sound that can be identical or hard rhyme or similar or soft rhyme. So we can say in summary that poetry is the use of words and language to evoke a writer's emotions and feelings and thought, while a poem is actually the arrangement of these words. Okay, so poetry is the use of words and the process of the using of these words and language to evoke a writer's feelings and thoughts. Meanwhile, poem is actually the arrangement of these words. Now you can differentiate between poetry and poem, right? And poetry is actually the process of creating a literary piece of using metaphor, symbols, and ambiguity. Meanwhile, poem is the end result of this process. Okay, so that's the differences between poetry and a poem. Now let's talk about um, poem versus poetry. So when we talk about poem versus poetry, this is can be summed up as literary works. So literary works are actually uh, being created for the purpose, for the sake of providing people with entertainment and inspiration, with information. So we can say that poetry and poem is meant to entertain people. When someone writes a novel or creates a movie, a scenario, or writes poetry or poem, the purpose is actually to give someone's information with the objective to entertain and give people inspiration. So this kind of thing have been around for quite such a long time, and many people 1,000 years ago have done this kind of practices. This kind of practices, you have to underline, is writing uh, literary work. Most were orally handed down. Most were not had chances to be written. Most are being distributed or disseminated by oral system. And when the modern times reached or arrived, people began to write this kind of literary works, right? And there are many forms in which these literary pieces are made of. Yeah. So I want to talk more deeply about a poem itself. So a poem is actually the arrangement of words, yeah, the arrangement of words that contain meaning and musical elements. Why I said musical elements? Because when you read this, it sounds like you are rhyming something. It seems like even though it doesn't have musical background, but it has musical elements. It is a piece of writing that exudes, that showcases the writer thoughts and writer's feeling in order to set a mood. Yeah, in order to set a mood. The mood can be happy mood, sad mood, simple mood, complex mood, and so on and so forth. Or in a few words, uh, even though the poem itself is very short, but it can contain lots of emotions. Yeah, it can contain lots of emotion. It can inspire and it can amaze people who read it. And it can be a welcome escape for people who have problems. For example, if you are sad, maybe reading poetry, reading poem, reading novel, watching TV, watching movies are the the escape ways for you. And that is totally wonderful. That is totally wonderful. Do you still remember what I have said earlier, that actually one of the function of writing poetry is to entertain people and to give people inspiration, right? Okay. And then I need to tell you as well that a poem can either be rhyming or non-rhyming. What does it mean? Rhyming means in your poetry you use uh, almost similar words with the similar sounds, yeah, at the end of every sentence. So it uses also symbols, and it has lines and stanzas that have sentences, fragments of sentences, or both of them. It also uses metaphor and alliteration, especially in poems for children. So when you are um, confused, what is alliteration? So alliteration is actually a repetition. Yeah, alliteration is actually a repetition of identical initial consonant sounds. Yeah, for example, uh, Peter Piper pick a pack of pickled peppers. Yeah. So it is a repetition of many consonant sounds in successive or closely associated syllables. Okay. So there is one um, famous uh, alliteration example from William Shakespeare's in the play of As You Like It. It sounds, and churlish chiding of the winter's swine, which means when it bites and blows upon my body. So Shakespeare used this alliteration in the play of As You Like It. Okay. And when we talk about alliteration, we also have to talk about uh, uh, metaphor. Yeah, metaphor. I think you also have understood what actually metaphor. If we talk about metaphor, we are talking about simile. I think I have also discussed this in the Google meeting before. So I'm sorry. So metaphor is actually uh, this is actually can be found in many literary works. Okay, so metaphors have many symbols and have many um, things or elements that can be identified easily. Yeah, when something starts with word like life, like, yeah, it is a similar or smile. But when we use metaphor, you have to use as plus adjective plus as, and then you compare human with other thing which is unhuman. For example, your hair is as smooth as silk. Now that's what we call as metaphor. Okay, I think you got it already. Right, so now we go back to the poem itself. I told you earlier that a poem can also be epic. Epic means very long, and it also consists of many moral lessons and moral stories. It could be narrative. A poem can also be dramatic and also lyrical. Okay? And a epic poem usually is the center of a mythical heroes, figures, a narrative poems that tells a story about dramatic poems, and then also consists of many lyrical verses and poems, which describes the poet's feelings and emotions. Okay. I think that's all for today. I hope you got something from this very short explanation about understanding the poem and poetry. Next week, we are going to talk about many elements of poem and poetry. Thank you for your attention and stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you again next week. Bye bye, everyone.